Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation from the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
When I first entered a lodge in this life, I recognized it from a former incarnation. I could recall the same officers' positions, symbols, and steps from 6,000 years ago. I found I was familiar with all its arrangements. They were identical with those I had known in Egypt 6,000 years ago.
In 1926, an elderly theosophist and co-mason named Charles Webster Leadbeater published a book unlike anything that had ever appeared in the long and often imaginative history of Masonic literature. In The Hidden Life in Freemasonry, he announced, without hesitation, that he personally remembered standing in a Masonic lodge 6,000 years ago, officiating as a priest of the Egyptian mysteries in a temple, whose arrangement, colours, geometry, and ritual formulae were precisely identical to those of a modern lodge room. According to Leadbeater, this was no poetic flourish. It was a literal recollection, retrieved through clairvoyance and reincarnational memory. The implication was astonishing. Freemasonry was not merely old, it was eternally recurring, a spiritual technology preserved across ages, civilizations, and incarnations. For Leadbeater, when the lodge opens, it is not only the brethren who assemble, but also the ghosts of forgotten temples, the architectures of ancient initiations, and the echoes of lives he believed he had personally lived before the dawn of written history. To understand the hidden life in Freemasonry, one must first situate Charles Webster Leadbeater within the extraordinary milieu that shaped both his imagination and his authority. Born in 1854, Leadbeater entered adulthood at the apex of the Victorian occult revival, a period marked by a curious mingling of scientific ambition and spiritual yearning. Originally an Anglican priest, he gravitated toward the Theosophical Society after reading H.P. Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled, resigning his curacy and dedicating himself to the investigation of hidden sciences with a fervour that would define the remainder of his life. By the 1890s, he had become one of the Society's most influential figures, gifted, or so it was claimed, with clairvoyance capable of penetrating the subtle planes, reading past incarnations, and discerning the invisible architecture of ceremonial rites. The world he entered was one of intellectual flamboyance and spiritual experimentation. Under Blavatsky and later Annie Besant, the Theosophical Society advanced a syncretic vision of world mythology, blending Hindu cosmology, Buddhist ethics, Western esotericism, Hermetic philosophy, and contemporary psychical research. In theosophical circles, the universe was layered, cyclical, occultly governed, and saturated with hidden hierarchies of masters. An imaginative environment in which Leadbeater's claims did not merely find acceptance, but were actively encouraged. Within this visionary framework, he began to articulate a doctrine of clairvoyant archaeology, the idea that ancient rites could be recovered not through artifacts or documents, but through direct, supersensory recollection. When Leadbeater encountered Freemasonry, first through its adoption into the theosophical adjacent Co-Masonic movement, he found a ritual system ready-made for such reinterpretation. To him, Masonry exemplified precisely the kind of symbolic ceremonial structure that could be read on both visible and invisible levels. He approached it not as a historian, but as a seer, convinced that the craft carried within it the surviving blueprint of an initiatory tradition far older than its recorded history suggested. His authority in these matters derived not from archival study, but from the theosophical conviction that a well-trained clairvoyant could discern the original, astral, and even prehistoric forms of human institutions. His reputation for clairvoyant insight was already well established by 1909, when he famously identified the young Jiddu Krishnamurti on an Indian beach as the future world teacher. A moment that illustrates the extraordinary confidence with which Leadbeater asserted his visionary perceptions. To his supporters, he was an adept with access to higher planes. To his critics, a man whose certainties were unsupported by any conventional method of verification. Yet, in the theosophical atmosphere of Adyar and Sydney, his claims resonated deeply. They helped fuel a movement increasingly fascinated with the idea that modern ritual could be the degraded remnant of a once global, spiritually unified civilization. It was from this world, half Edwardian mysticism, half millenarian ambition, that the hidden life in Freemasonry emerged. The text is not merely an interpretation of the craft, but a product of the imaginative cosmos that surrounded Leadbeater, a cosmos in which reincarnation was a legitimate historical method, clairvoyance a scholarly tool, and ceremonial ritual a technologically precise instrument capable of shaping the subtle fabric of the world. Understanding that context is essential, for without it, the scale and audacity of Leadbeater's claims cannot be fully appreciated. At the heart of the hidden life in Freemasonry lies a thesis as audacious as it is internally coherent, that modern craft masonry is the surviving surface expression of a colossal ancient initiatory system whose real mechanisms operate not on the physical plane but on subtler levels of existence. Leadbeater's work does not engage with the historical record familiar to scholars of the 18th century. Anderson's constitutions, the Premier and Antient's Grand Lodges, or the documentary Evolution of Ritual. Instead, he deliberately sidesteps the ordinary evidentiary framework, claiming a superior method of inquiry through clairvoyance. What he proposes is nothing less than a metaphysical anatomy of Freemasonry, a detailed account of what the ritual does invisibly, and what it once did in the imagined splendor of the ancient world. According to Leadbeater, the craft degrees function as a kind of esoteric technology, precisely designed to channel, concentrate, and redistribute occult forces. Officers are not merely symbolic representatives of moral virtues or historical characters. They are conductors in an energetic circuit, each position associated with specific currents of force drawn from higher planes. Every movement, word, and symbol is treated as a technical operation, what he calls a scientific rite, whose true purpose is to shape the subtle bodies of the initiate. In this reading, the working tools, the lights, the square and compasses, and the pillars are instruments that manipulate astral and etheric structures, each contributing to the construction of an inner, luminous edifice that mirrors the outward ceremonial arrangement. Central to his thesis is the belief that the ceremonial form preserved in Masonry is not an 18th century invention, but a degraded remnant of a primordial, trans-cultural mystery tradition. Leadbeater asserts that the ritual patterns of the craft, its progress from darkness to light, its geometric floor plan, its officer stations oriented to the cardinal points, are survivals of far older temple systems, particularly those of ancient Egypt. This is not a symbolic continuity nor a romantic speculation. For Leadbeater, the connection is literal. The ancient original persists through successive civilizations, maintained by occult custodians and re-emerging in later ages under new guises. Masonry, in this scheme, is the present expression of a tradition whose earlier flowering he claims to have witnessed in former incarnations. What emerges from these claims is a complete reframing of the craft: ritual as cosmological science, history as reincarnational memory, and symbolism as the vestigial code of a universal initiatory order. Whether persuasive or fantastical, the system is internally unified. Leadbeater's vision of Masonry rests upon his broader theosophical worldview: hierarchical, cyclical, and governed by subtle energies. And it is upon this foundation that the remainder of the hidden life is built. Understanding his thesis is essential before approaching the more elaborate and more extravagant elements of his clairvoyant reconstruction. In The Hidden Life in Freemasonry, Leadbeater advances his most technically elaborate and metaphysically ambitious claim that every lodge, when opened and properly conducted, functions as a complex occult apparatus operating simultaneously on the physical, astral, and etheric planes. This notion, distinct from anything found in the recognized traditions of Masonic ritual interpretation, rests upon the theosophical conviction that ceremonial forms act as conduits for subtle energies, each of which belongs to a structured hierarchy of forces. Leadbeater's approach is therefore not symbolic but mechanical. He treats the lodge as an instrument of esoteric engineering whose components, gestures, and officers correspond to discrete energetic functions. According to his description, the moment the lodge is opened on the square, bands of astral radiance descend into the room, aligning themselves with the stations and furniture in a configuration that is both geometrically precise and metaphysically predetermined. The arrangement is not imaginative embellishment, but in his view, a real-time architectural transformation of space. A striking feature of Leadbeater's system is his integration of the theosophical 7 rays, particularly the 7th, the ray of ceremonial order, rhythm, and magical harmonization. He asserts that every regular lodge is overshadowed by a great 7th ray angel, a non-human intelligence responsible for stabilizing the currents of force generated by the ritual. Around this central figure, he describes a hierarchy of lesser devas and elementals, each assigned to various ritual components: the altar, the lights, the stations of the officers, the perambulations, and the spoken formulae. Their presence, he insists, is not metaphorical but operational. They regulate the flow of energy, respond to certain words of power, and contribute to the construction of what he calls the inner temple, a radiant, geometric duplicate of the lodge built from subtle matter that mirrors and perfects the physical arrangement. This astral edifice, according to Leadbeater, is the true locus of initiatory work, while the visible rite serves merely as its physical anchor. It is this architectural duplication, the idea that a second, invisible temple rises whenever the lodge is opened, that distinguishes Leadbeater's account from all other esoteric readings of Freemasonry. In his description, the work of the officers becomes a choreography of energetic manipulation. Gavels act as triggers for sudden oscillations of force. The lights emit coloured currents. The square and compasses operate as radiant polarities. And the perambulations trace luminous circuits that activate the entire design. The lodge room, in short, becomes a magical engine powered by human intention and angelic cooperation, a fusion of ceremonial precision and cosmic geometry. Whatever one thinks of the plausibility of these claims, the internal logic is rigorous and thoroughly integrated into the wider theosophical worldview. Leadbeater's lodge functions not as a historical survival, but as a living metaphysical organism, a machine built of symbolism, force, and light, operating in dimensions accessible only to those whom he believed capable of perceiving beyond the physical plane. If Leadbeater's clairvoyant reconstruction of the lodge presents Freemasonry as an occult machine animated by angelic intelligences, his doctrine of the hidden hierarchy, the world-governing fraternity of adepts, extends that vision into the realm of esoteric governance. In The Hidden Life in Freemasonry, he argues that the craft is not merely overseen by elected Grand Masters or constituted authorities, but is in fact connected to and partially directed by a higher order of spiritual overseers belonging to the theosophical tradition of the Great White Brotherhood. Among these exalted beings, none plays a more significant role in his system than the enigmatic Comte de Saint-Germain, whom he designates the ruler of the seventh ray and the true head of all genuine Masonry. This Saint-Germain is not the historical adventurer and court diplomat of 18th century European legend, but a composite figure shaped by Rosicrucian myth, occult speculation, and theosophical doctrine. Leadbeater attributes to him a vast series of incarnations: Proclus, Roger Bacon, Christian Rosenkreutz, Francis Bacon, and others, suggesting a continuous thread of esoteric guardianship spanning classical antiquity, the medieval scholastic world, the Rosicrucian manifestos, and the philosophical ferment of the early modern period. In this interpretative scheme, each incarnation serves as a phase in the long-term custodianship of the mystery tradition, culminating in the modern era with Saint-Germain's oversight of all ceremonial systems aligned with the seventh ray. What gives this claim its particular colouring, however, is Leadbeater's insistence that he encountered Saint-Germain in person. He describes meeting the adept in Rome in 1901 and engaging in a long conversation concerning esoteric evolution and the future of the ceremonial arts. The account is uncorroborated and entirely dependent on Leadbeater's own testimony, but it functions in his system as a crucial legitimizing moment. If he truly met the hidden architect of the ritual, then his own clairvoyant readings of Masonry are not speculative, but transmitted. The assertion also reflects the theosophical technique of deriving doctrinal authority not from documents or tradition, but from the visionary certainty of the seer. Within Co-Masonic circles influenced by Leadbeater, the figure of Saint-Germain assumed a quasi-liturgical function. Portraits of him were placed above or beside the master's chair, not as symbolic tributes, but as focal points for what Leadbeater describes as thought forms. These, he claimed, allowed the adept to appear in subtle form and preside over the workings of the lodge. Such assertions, understandably, were regarded with skepticism by mainstream Masonic observers. Yet within the theosophical milieu, they served to integrate Masonry into the larger spiritual economy of the masters, angels, rays, and evolutionary forces that structured the entire theosophical world view. Whatever one makes of the plausibility of these claims, the system is consistent with Leadbeater's broader world view. In this formulation, Freemasonry is not merely a fraternal society, but a ceremonial instrument within a cosmic hierarchy, administered from above, guided from within, and supervised by beings who move across centuries and civilizations. It is a vision grandiose in scope and remarkable in its imaginative audacity, laying the groundwork for the even more elaborate mythic reconstructions that follow in his work. If the earlier sections of the hidden life in Freemasonry claim that the craft operates through unseen forces and angelic overseers, it is in Leadbeater's Egyptian reconstructions that his imagination reaches its most extravagant and revealing heights. For him, the relationship between Freemasonry and ancient Egypt is not symbolic, analogical, or speculative. It is genealogical. Masonry, he argues, is the modern vestige of a ritual system perfected in the great temple complexes of the Nile Valley, where geometry, liturgy, astronomy, and metaphysics converged with unparalleled precision. This conviction is rooted not in archaeology or comparative religion, but in what he presents as personal recollection, retrieved across incarnations. Leadbeater insists that he once served as an officiant in an Egyptian temple, whose structure, functions, and ceremonial sequence were precisely identical to that of the modern lodge. The implication is startling. The craft is, in his view, not merely ancient, but literally prehistoric in origin. Its rites preserved across the rise and fall of civilizations by hidden custodians and, in his own case, through the continuity of reincarnation. Leadbeater's Egyptian vision is rendered in vivid, almost cinematic detail. He describes a vast stone chamber illuminated by torches and bathed in a subtle astral radiance, pillars aligned to stellar configurations, altars flanked by sacred emblems, and a ritual sequence that culminates in the invocation of Osiris. The ceremony, he recounts, is not remotely recognizable as any documented form of Egyptian liturgy, but rather a theosophical synthesis, a rite of light, life, and resurrection that reflects the society's reinterpretation of ancient myth in evolutionary terms. Central to this rite is what Leadbeater describes as a magical love feast, in which consecrated food becomes the vessel of descending spiritual force. According to his account, the moment the invocation is uttered, a torrent of astral light pours down upon the altar, visibly altering the appearance of the offerings, transforming the icing of the bread from pale to crimson as divine energy enters it. Portions are then ceremonially distributed, not only to the human participants, but to 9 attendant angelic beings stationed at subsidiary altars throughout the hall. To Leadbeater, this was not allegory, but a literal recollection of a functioning temple technology. What is most telling in this account is the means by which Leadbeater claims to authenticate it. He does not appeal to hieroglyphic texts, archaeological excavations, or Egyptological scholarship. Indeed, his vision diverges sharply from all three. Instead, he asserts that these experiences are remembered, accessible to the trained clairvoyant who can pierce the veil of time and retrieve the lived details of past incarnations. Egyptian ritual, in his telling, is not studied but recalled. The origins of Masonry are not inferred but witnessed. This method positions Freemasonry within a vast spiritual continuity, linking the modern initiate to a cycle of cosmic drama stretching back millennia. It also underscores the fundamental premise of the hidden life, that ceremonial tradition is not built upon historical documents, but upon the inner, persistent structures of the soul. Leadbeater's Egyptian chapter therefore serves a double function. On the one hand, it is a mythic charter narrative providing Masonry with an antiquity and grandeur that far surpass conventional histories. On the other, it reveals the extent of his imaginative metaphysics, in which temples are eternal, reincarnation is historical method, and the craft is the present face of a primordial system. Whether one regards these claims as visionary insight or fantasy, they represent one of the most distinctive and most controversial elements of his work. The edifice constructed in The Hidden Life in Freemasonry, with its angelic hierarchies, astral temples, reincarnated priesthoods, and Egyptian survivals, rests entirely upon Leadbeater's claim to clairvoyant authority. It is therefore unsurprising that the greatest challenge to his system came not from external scholarship, but from within the Theosophical movement itself, when one of his most dramatic clairvoyant assertions disintegrated in public. The story of Jiddu Krishnamurti, whom Leadbeater identified in 1909 as the destined world teacher and vehicle of the coming Maitreya, reveals the fragility of his visionary claims and marks the decisive crisis in his career. Leadbeater first encountered Krishnamurti as a quiet, seemingly unremarkable 14-year-old boy on the beach at Adyar. According to Leadbeater, he immediately perceived the boy's aura as the most wonderful he had ever seen, devoid of selfishness and uniquely suited to serve as the vessel for the awaited spiritual messenger. This certainty was accepted by Annie Besant and by much of the Society's leadership, and in 1911 the Order of the Star in the East was created to prepare the world for Krishnamurti's appearance as the vehicle of the new Messiah. For the next 2 decades, Krishnamurti was educated, protected, and publicly promoted as the living embodiment of a cosmic expectation. Leadbeater's prestige soared, for his clairvoyant acumen appeared confirmed by the institutional momentum now gathering around his prophecy. But in 1929, in a moment that combined personal defiance with philosophical clarity, Krishnamurti dissolved the order before thousands of followers at Oman, declaring that truth could not be organized and that no spiritual authority could be transmitted by institution, hierarchy, or ritual. With that single gesture, he dismantled the central prophecy of the Theosophical movement and repudiated the role Leadbeater had assigned to him. The consequences were seismic. Many Theosophists abandoned the society, others withdrew into disillusionment, and Leadbeater's status as the authoritative clairvoyant of the movement was permanently damaged. To his critics, the collapse of the Krishnamurti project served as an unambiguous demonstration of the unreliability of Leadbeater's visionary method. To his supporters, it became a painful reminder of the risks inherent in placing doctrinal certainty upon private psychic insight. For Freemasonry, this episode had indirect but significant implications. If Leadbeater's central extramural prophecy could fail so publicly, then the monumental claims of the hidden life, claims equally dependent on his clairvoyance, were rendered suspect. The Egyptian reconstructions, the angelic temple architecture, the cosmic hierarchy presided over by Saint-Germain, all these rested upon the same mode of insight that had now become a point of public contention. Yet, Leadbeater himself continued to treat his Masonic clairvoyance as wholly independent of the Krishnamurti crisis, maintaining his interpretations even as the philosophical foundations of his authority fractured. Any assessment of the hidden life in Freemasonry must reckon with the intellectual and methodological tensions that underpin Leadbeater's project. While his text has achieved a considerable afterlife within certain esoteric and co-Masonic circles, it has never been accepted as a credible account within the broader scholarly or Masonic communities. This divergence stems from foundational disagreements about epistemology, historical method, and the nature of ritual tradition. Leadbeater's entire interpretative framework rests upon clairvoyant testimony, a mode of knowledge that, however sincerely presented, cannot be subjected to verification, corroboration, or critical scrutiny. This renders his work incompatible with academic historiography, which relies upon documentary evidence, philological analysis, and archaeological context. Egyptologists, for example, regard his reconstructions of Egyptian temple practice as devoid of historical grounding, bearing no demonstrable relationship to known liturgical texts, artistic conventions, or the material record of ritual life along the Nile. Within Freemasonry, the response has been similarly skeptical. Mainstream Masonic historians, from R. F. Gould to Henry Sadler and Douglas Knoop, have emphasized that the craft emerged from early modern guild traditions, Enlightenment moral philosophy, and 18th-century fraternal experimentation, rather than from any demonstrable connection to ancient temple religion. Leadbeater's assertion of a literal, unbroken lineage from pharaonic priesthoods to modern lodges contradicts the vast consensus of Masonic scholarship. Moreover, his descriptions of angelic intelligences, astral machinery, and reincarnational continuity depart so radically from the craft's own understanding of symbolism and ritual that many Masonic jurisdictions regard his work as wholly extraneous to the tradition. His interpretations, while imaginative, effectively shift Freemasonry from the realm of moral allegory into a speculative occult cosmology, thereby raising concerns about doctrinal confusion and the introduction of non-Masonic elements into rituals and lectures. Scholars of new religious movements have also offered critiques, observing that Leadbeater's approach reflects a distinct pattern within Theosophy: the reconfiguration of existing traditions, whether Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, or Masonic, into expressions of a universal esoteric doctrine articulated by clairvoyant leaders. Historians such as Jocelyn Godwin, Nicholas Goodrick Clark, and Jean-Louis Simmons have noted that such universalizing schemes often obscure the specific historical trajectories of the traditions they absorb. Leadbeater's work follows this pattern with unusual audacity, appropriating Freemasonry's symbols and structure, while imposing upon them a vast metaphysical superstructure derived from theosophical cosmology. As a result, the hidden life serves as an illuminating case study in how modern esoteric authors reinterpret older traditions through the lenses of contemporary spiritual movements. Although the hidden life in Freemasonry exerted little influence on the mainstream craft, its impact within certain esoteric, theosophical, and co-Masonic environments has been enduring and structurally significant. Universal Co-Masonry, originally le droit humain, which expanded rapidly in the early 20th century under Annie Besant and later under Leadbeater himself, became the primary institutional home for his Masonic reinterpretations. In these circles, his clairvoyant observations were not merely tolerated, but treated as authoritative insights into the deeper mechanics of ritual. As a result, many Co-Masonic lodges subtly incorporated his metaphysical framework into their ritual commentaries, lectures, and educational materials, particularly those relating to the role of colour, geometry, and ceremonial intention. Even where the official ritual text remained unchanged, the interpretive atmosphere of Co-Masonry in the English-speaking world bore unmistakable traces of Leadbeater's influence. His doctrine of the 7 rays and the presence of angelic overseers found a natural home in these environments, shaping not only Masonic exegesis, but also the broader liturgical style of the liberal Catholic Church, which Leadbeater co-founded with James Wedgwood in 1916. The Church's highly ceremonial Eucharistic rites, with their emphasis on colour, gesture, and the descent of subtle energies, were constructed upon the same metaphysical principles as those outlined in the Hidden Life. This cross-pollination created a distinctive theosophical liturgical culture in which Masonry, the liberal Catholic Church, and the broader esoteric teachings of the Theosophical Society formed an interlocking ceremonial ecosystem. Beyond institutional settings, Leadbeater's imaginative reconstructions have continued to attract interest within certain strands of modern esotericism. The idea of an astral temple, constructed in tandem with physical ritual, has been adopted, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, within contemporary magical orders, ceremonial magical practitioners, and New Age ritual groups, many of which emphasize visualization, energy work, and subtle body metaphysics. Though few of these groups acknowledge a direct lineage from Leadbeater, the conceptual parallels are often unmistakable. His claim that every ceremonial act has an invisible, energetic counterpart has echoed across later occult literature, influencing writers such as Alice Bailey, Jeffrey Hodson, and later New Age interpreters of sacred geometry and subtle energies. For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons for Freemasons. Visit FromTheQuarries.com or YouTube at From the Quarries.